Welcome to Mastering VMware vSphere 6. Chapter 1, Introducing VMware's vSphere 6. So this is always really good because one of the first questions that I get asked is, what's virtualization? An important part here is virtualization is virtualizing the underlying hardware on a machine so that we can better or more efficiently use resources. So, for example, instead of having 20 servers, we could actually have one physical server that is then running the software or virtualizing the additional 20 servers on top of it. Uh, Virtualization covers things like desktop servers, storage, networking devices. It was reported early 2014 that about half the world's servers are virtualized, and the proposed plan is mid 80% by 2017 will be virtualized. A little interesting fact is VMware is the biggest network vendor if we define it based off of switch ports. So what is vSphere? vSphere is the 6th generation Type 1 hypervisor. We normally call it ESXi. ESXi actually is the software that runs directly on the hardware. So you have hardware, then you have the ESXi software, and then on top of that you have the VMs. That's a Type 1 hypervisor, meaning you do not have to have a fully fledged operating system, then the virtualization software to run it. For example, VMware Workstation or VMware Player, you have to have the hardware, Windows, and then in Windows you install the hypervisor, and then inside the hypervisor all of your VMs. That is not a Type 1 hypervisor. A few other random things is, do we have a way to essentially manage everything? If we have several vSphere boxes and we have several VMs running on each box, how do we manage them? We manage them through what's called vCenter. vCenter is the actual management component. You do not need vCenter. You can manage all hosts separate, but that becomes more cumbersome. So that does become an issue. vSphere has a few products that we need to talk about. ESXi and vCenter are the big ones. They have the VUM and the orchestrator. But again, we're talking mainly about ESXi and vCenter. So again, vSphere has a large number of features like virtual SMPs, vMotion, and DRS. So vMotion actually is a way, if we have more than one physical server running ESXi, vMotion actually allows for live migration between hosts. Meaning if one physical machine is going down, we can actually use vMotion to actually bring up the VMs on a different machine without the end users noticing. We have things like 10 gigabit Ethernets. We have that are becoming more and more of a concern. We also have different ways to install vSphere. Other features are storage and network I/O control, policy, high availability, fault tolerance. This whole ESXi host migration actually was part of that vMotion. What I'm doing is I'm going through the book and I'm making sure page by page that I'm covering all of the major areas. For example, chapter 1 also talks about how you can choose the appropriate platform, choosing the appropriate hardware and whatnot, as well as how to determine the storage architecture. Are you going to want it on a shared storage so that all ESXi hosts can have the access to the shared storage? Or are you going to have them stored individually on each individual ESXi host? That's an option. Normally for vSphere deployments, I recommend 2 or 3 ESXi hosts attached to some type of shared storage, normally iSCSI. That way, you can take advantage of things like high availability and vMotion. That way, again, if one ESXi host goes down, you can quickly migrate to the existing host without a problem. A few issues is things like the 10 gigabit Ethernet virtual adapter. That's been a growing concern. So that brings us up to another major concept, which are what are some of the maximums? What can we have? This is a chart that you do want to know because on your vSphere or your VCP certification, they actually do ask these based off of the vSphere version that you're going after. For example, I have a vSphere 5.5 also. And so when I did my testing, I had to know the vSphere 5.5 maximums. If you're going for the vSphere 6 test, you need to know the vSphere 6 maximums. How many virtual CPUs per hosts? How many virtual CPUs per physical CPU cores? How many virtual CPUs per VM? How much RAM per host? How much RAM per VM? What's the disk size per VM? And what virtual NICs are allotted per VM? And what type of virtual NICs are you allowed in vSphere 6? So there are some things there. So another question becomes, well, how does this work? Like, how do you get the appropriate virtual CPUs and memory and virtual NICs? A lot of this is tied to software licensing. You use the license to unlock features. You can have homogeneous hosts, meaning you can mix and match between the hosts depending on the features that each host needs. For example, you may have just standard licensing for 2 hosts where you may have a premium license for a 3rd host. You can mix and match. Again, centralized management through vCenter. One of the last things that they look at is what should be virtualized. And the big thing here is everything. You can virtualize just about everything. The big thing here is virtualization does allow you better mobility options. Your work can go with you based off of whatever device you have. Virtual desktops are a great example. I could have a virtual desktop on my PC, be working on a file, leave the office, bring it up on my phone or tablet, and all my work is there, all my software is there, all my data is there. It goes with you. All right, one last thing I want to talk about, because we didn't talk about it in our PowerPoint, is how do we deploy vSphere ESXi? You can do it through auto deployment. You can do it via installation via media. You can do it through an interactive ESXi install. You can do it off of different medias. So there are different ways to install ESXi. So I wanted to point that out now because our chapter didn't talk about it, but chapter 1 in the book did. And so again, there's lots of auto deployment features that we were going to get into later on in our book. That's actually it for this chapter. Thank you.